Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Dr. Jay Feldstein, and today we're talking with Dr. Vivek Murthy, the 19th and 21st Surgeon General of the United States. In addition to serving as Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy is a best-selling author and a trusted advisor to presidents, lawmakers, business leaders, educators, and healthcare organizations on a wide range of public health issues. He co-chaired the White House COVID-19 task force under President Biden and has released major Surgeon General reports on health misinformation, clinician burnout, and workplace mental health and well-being. His 2023 report on loneliness and isolation helped spark a national conversation about social health and how our connections affect both our physical and mental well-being. Dr. Murthy is also the author of Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. Today we'll talk about his upcoming role as PCOM's Bitonte Commencement speaker, as well as the latest trends in medical misinformation, AI, and how building relationships can make you a better clinician. Welcome, Vivek.
It's great to be with you today, Jay.
Well, I thank you for joining us. We're really excited about today. One of the things that came to my mind is, how did your experience as Surgeon General during the pandemic shape your approach to addressing medical misinformation and inform your current philosophy on the issue?
I came to see even more clearly than ever, Jay, during the pandemic that our ability to share information with people is really based on our ability to build trust. And trust, it turns out, is mediated not by who's got the best ads or the best designs, on their logos, but it's really defined by trust. Have we built the relationships, if you will, that people need to know that they can trust us? So trust is based in relationships. And that, I think, is especially important at a time like this, when we are not only, still dealing with the remnants of the last pandemic, but looking to the future and realizing there may be and will be public health emergencies in the future. And at those times, we're going to rely on the trust that we have built to be able to share information that people can rely on. So if we're not building the relationships that are needed now to really merit that trust, then it's going to be hard for us, I think, to respond well in the next pandemic. Now, what does that look like? Well, to me, I think increasingly, people's trust it's gone from larger institutions, which perhaps have seen less and less confidence in them over the years, to much more local sort of sources of trust. People tend to trust their individual doctor or the nurse who's cared for their family. They tend to perhaps trust their children's teachers. Maybe they'll trust their local Department of Health if they see them and have had a relationship with them. They tend to trust their family and their friends as well, and often will look to them for advice. And so when we think about it that way, I think if you're a large public health institution, if you're a healthcare institution like a hospital or a clinic, it's really important that you are building relationships with people in your community so that people know the individuals who are working in your organization. So they see you at town halls, they encounter you at local events, they see you at town halls that their congregation may put on together, their faith organization or their school. When people see us, they know who we are, they can build relationships with us. That forms trust, and that makes it more possible to deliver accurate information. With all of that said, I do think it's important to underscore that the challenge of misinformation is only going to grow in the future as we see technology evolve rapidly. Even in the early days of the pandemic, I would see what seemed like peer-reviewed publications posted by clinicians online saying, hey, this new data is now out, peer-reviewed, that says compound X, fill in the blank, it may be useful for preventing an illness or for treating a certain illness. And later it came to light that those peer-reviewed publications were in fact synthesized by artificial intelligence. They were AI products, not real products. But it was very hard for people on the outside to know, including clinicians. So I think that we are going to see this problem become even more complex, where it's harder and harder to tell what's real and what's not in terms of what we see online, which is, again, why the relationships that we build, the human relationships with people, are going to become all the more important, because that, I think, can be the trusted source that people look to.
From a relationship standpoint, I think a lot of us, yearn for the days of the trusted family physician.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that delivery model of how care is delivered today is changing. there's a lot of fragmentation in the delivery of healthcare, whether it's for-profit, online teledoc companies, whether it's a multi-specialty practice group where the primary care providers may see a different patient on each, upcoming visit. With that fragmentation, it makes it harder for us to build that trust. So how do we overcome that? Because I'm with you. I mean, trust is the most important aspect of the patient doctor slash healthcare provider relationship.
Look, I hear you. And that fragmentation, I think, is and often making patients' lives harder. It's harder. Like I help people all the time who are trying to navigate the health system, and they are often at a loss to figure out where to go, like who to like talk to about a specific problem. And they will often don't know who's quarterbacking their care. That has become increasingly challenging. So I do think you're right that structurally we have even more options for people. We have historically had a fragmentation of care in our country, and primary care has not gotten the kind of support and structurally and financially that it needs to be able to be that quarterback that people need. But I think that one of the groups that are really losing out the most are often patients as well as clinicians. And I think the world of healthcare is becoming harder and harder for patients to navigate. So I actually think that as healthcare becomes even more complex, that it will become all the more important for people to have someone they can look to help them make sense of the information they're getting, of the options that they have in front of them for where they can get care. And that means in part that our role in medicine has to evolve. My father was a primary care doctor and continues to be actually in Miami, Florida. I was inspired to practice medicine as a kid by spending time with him in his medical practice. And what he did was often pull together all of the care that his patients needed, help them make sense of everything. But the world is very different from how my father experienced when I was growing up. There's more technology, there's more knowledge than any one person can possibly inhabit or master. And so we have to think, I think, differently as primary care doctors, not as people who have to have all of the knowledge, that a patient needs, but as people who understand how to navigate a system that has become extraordinarily complex. And that means learning how we use AI properly and effectively to bring the best information to our patients. It means being able to advocate for our patients, even within our healthcare systems, so that we have the right structures in place to enable us to better support them. And so there's a lot that's needed here in terms of culture change, process change, in order for clinicians to be able to play that role of coordinating care, of helping drive and be a partner with somebody in their healing. And that's why I don't think it should fall all on the shoulders of clinicians. I think it's up to healthcare institutions, to our training institutions as well, our medical schools, our DO schools, our residency training programs, to help rethink the world in which we train our clinicians and rethink what it means actually to be a partner in care right now, which is truly what patients still need. Because as much as things are changing, the one thing that's not going to change is that patients will always need a partner in their healing, a human who can help them make sense of what to do. And I want to underscore this because I was at a medical conference recently, and a young trainee came up to me after my talk and said, "Hey, can you just give me the honest truth here? Am I going to be obsolete in the future? Did I just put all these years into training for no reason?" And I said to her, I said, "Look, I was like, there's a lot that we perhaps used to do as clinicians that technology may be able to do instead. But the one part of healing that technology will never be able to do is to be truly human, to provide empathy to another individual, to understand their values through their own life experiences and understand how that should shape the decisions that they may make about their care." AI may try to approximate that. It may get the right tone of voice. It may say the right words. But at the end of the day, a machine can sit by your bedside and hold your hand. It can't understand what it means to have lost your spouse, to have lost a child, to have lost a parent. It can't understand what it means to have lost the dreams and hopes you had for the future because of the illness you're contending with. It can't know what it's like to live with the paralyzing fear that can come with a new diagnosis. These are deeply human experiences And that's why clinicians will always be needed to help shape, guide, and support patients through their experiences.
Great answer, and also a great segue
Hmm.
into how do you see AI impacting the future of medical education? And I know you could probably turn around and ask me that question, but I got to ask it first.
Yeah, yeah. I suspect you've got very sophisticated thoughts on this since you're living it. My view is that we cannot certainly hide from AI, and we shouldn't. I think AI has a potential in some ways to make healthcare better. I think it actually can enable us to educate clinicians more effectively as well by being able to tailor the experience of medical education more so to each individual student. But with that said, I think that the presence of AI increasingly in healthcare makes the human dimension of being a clinician all the more important. And that's something that I think we have not historically emphasized enough. Over our time, I think as biomedicine advanced and as research and technology just really took off and provided us with more tools in medicine, I think we came over time to focus more and more on those tools and less on the human skills that were critical to be a healer. And you could actually see that in many medical training programs where you would see, for example, people getting promoted on the basis of the research they did, on the publications that they had, on the research funding that they brought in. But the reality is that we know that empathy and care and teaching matter too, but it was far more rare to see people getting promoted on the basis of those human skills and qualities. And so we may think, well, that's a minor thing, but trainees take notice of this. They notice what's being promoted, what's being lifted up, and that helps them understand what's really valued in a culture. And so I think in training culture, we have to double down on these human components of care. And that means, like, how do we train students very effectively to be empathic and compassionate? How do we train them to go beyond the patient in front of them, but to actually start talking and engaging with communities to help build that trust that we know is so vital when it comes to addressing public health issues? And how do we train them in how to work effectively in a team? We know that that's extraordinarily important in medicine, yet it's probably underemphasized, as a skill set. So I think that these are going to become all the more important in the age of AI. But I don't think we should assume that just because AI is advancing, that means that there's less for clinicians to learn from the medical standpoint, the scientific standpoint, because one of the biggest things I think we learn in our training is how to think. And it doesn't mean that you have to have every fact at your disposal, that you have to memorize every formula that you need for clinical decision making. These are all places where AI can help. But learning how to think, how to prioritize, how to reason when when you have different facts in front of you, that is a critical skill. And I credit my mentors and teachers who helped shape my own clinical reasoning and thinking early on, because I still lean on those skills today, not just for clinical work, but in my work in public health. It'll always be important for us to teach our trainees how to think and how to be truly human. And that means empathic, compassionate, and kind in their delivery of care. And I think it's going to become all the more important in an age of AI.
I think one of the challenges, from a medical education standpoint, so we've got them for the first 2 years per se
Yeah.
on campus and in most medical schools. And then it's the third and fourth year when they're out doing clinical rotations, when you're really dependent on your mentoring faculty.
Yes.
And a lot of the older physicians who have mastered, hopefully, the humanistic, empathetic, kindness skill set, they're retiring. And, we've got more of a generation of, I'll say, technical physicians as opposed to humanistic per se.
Yes.
So I think we really have to figure out ways to bring the humanism in early, and hopefully that will carry them forward in their, third and fourth year and residency training as well. Because as we both know, mentorship is incredibly important in medical education, especially in the clinical years.
I think I noticed actually when I was in medical school in my first year, I was starting to notice that many of my classmates who came in with high ideals, myself included, were starting to get cynical actually after even a few months in medical school. And I happened to go to another school, a medical school, UCSF, to visit a dear friend, my roommate from college. And he that was going to this evening course that he was enrolled in at UCSF called The Healer's Art, which at that time I believe was for first year medical students. And it was a course to really double down on these human values that brought us to medicine and to anchor ourselves in the empathy and the compassion, those human skills that we needed not just to be successful as clinicians, but to also survive and come through the experience whole. And when I decided afterward, and with the blessing of the course director, whose name was Rachel Remen, I decided I wanted to try to start a similar course in my medical school. I was at Yale. And what I found, which is very interesting, was that when we started that course, many of the students who started coming were actually third and fourth year students, as you said, who had left the first two classroom years and now were in their clinical years in the hospital, but were really feeling hit hard by the cynicism and the burnout that they were seeing all around them. So you're right that there's a certain amount that we can do in the classroom, but when students go into the clinical setting, that culture matters too. And that deeply affects and shapes how they think about themselves, how they think about their future, how they think about patients. So I do think that this kind of grounding in the human elements of medicine has to be there throughout training. And that means our hospitals, that our clinical partners in clinical education, rather, they have got to be a part of this process as well. Because the truth is, when we don't have this human element like that we emphasize and underscore and support, it's not just bad for patients, but clinicians burn out too. And one of the things I worked on when I was Surgeon General was this issue of health worker burnout, and seeing extraordinarily high rates of burnout in the clinical professions is just not good for the country as a whole. But I think that a part of it is rooted in being disconnected from each other and from those core elements that brought many of us to medicine, which is the desire to participate in someone's care, to be able to impact someone's life in a positive way. And a lot of the, I think, emphasis, on other elements and a lot of the distraction, if you will, in terms of the administrative burden that we increasingly place on clinicians, I think takes away from that incredibly important source of fulfillment.
Well, I have one last question for you that I'm going to take a wild guess. I almost know what the answer is, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. On April 28th, you'll address our graduates in Philadelphia. And if these new health professionals will remember just one story idea from your commencement address 5 years from that date, what would you want that to be?
I would love our future clinicians to understand that the most important qualities they need to be a healer are the qualities that they had before they came to medical training. Their ability to listen deeply, to care with their full hearts, and to lead with love. These are qualities many of us come into this world with. Sometimes we become dissuaded from leaning on those qualities because we're told it'll make us look weak, we'll be taken advantage of, we'll seem naive. But the more that I've lived life and the more I've had different experiences and worked in different settings, the more I've seen that it is those qualities, our listening, our compassion, our love, that actually are our greatest sources of strength. They would help us. They're what help us become the kind of healers I think that we want to be, not just in the exam room with individual patients, but with our colleagues and in our communities. So that is my hope for what people will hold on to, because I think the world around us is always telling us that we're not enough. It's always telling us that we need one more skill, one more tool, one more product, one more service, one more something else in order to be worthy. But I don't think that that story is right. I don't think it speaks to the richness of who we are and who we come into this world as being. And I think that what happens is that we tend to forget the gifts that we have. But if we can remember and hold on to those gifts, we can remember again that the most important qualities we need to be a healer are the ones that we had long before we came into medical training, then I believe that that will stand us in good stead and will make us better clinicians, better teachers, and more fulfilled human beings.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than that. So, Vivek, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and for helping us better understand how to live healthier, more connected lives. We're grateful to you for your time and insight, and we're honored to have you join us at this year's commencement ceremony in Philadelphia. I'm Dr. Jay Feldstein, and this has been PCOM Perspectives.